The king laughed. Thank Christ. It wasn't always an easy feat. Though I had only been at it for 4 years, I knew well what King Henry liked. I could also read his face, and by the tilt of a ginger brow and the flicker of a lash, I knew he was not in need of his jester at the moment, for his eyes lingered not on his wife, Queen Catherine, stuffed away so he would not have to look upon her, but instead on her erstwhile maid of honour, Anne Boleyn. In fact, she was no longer required to serve the Queen, and we at court had little doubt as to what that might mean. King Henry tapped his foot to the rhythm of a merry song plucked out by his musicians. He sat at the head table, facing outward toward all, and his chair was under the cloth of state, a canopy that climbed up the wall and hung over his royal self, so that all would know exactly where he was in the room, as if they wouldn't know. And so, as quiet as a man can be, with bells sewed to his person, I slipped away. I wore my usual blue doublet, a short-waisted and tight-fitting garment that covered my chemise with long, tight sleeves. My yellow hose was tied to the doublet's hem with points, laces, that is, tipped with silver. Silver tipped because Henry paid me enough, and I was vain enough to want it. I also wore a hood of party colours of yellow and green, and there would be no mistaking me for a courtier or a servant whilst wearing such. There were also a few tiny bells sewn to my doublet's sleeves and the hood, for it was easy to caper about in only this, as I was always rolling on the floor or climbing onto tables or simply gambling about. But more often than not, because the palace was so cold, I wore my coat over all. It was of green wool, with many pleats at the skirt that reached down to my knees, because I fancied myself a courtier, and had the coin for pleats, for the more pleats a man had, the wealthier he was, or appeared to be. And at court, it was as much about appearance as competence. The former over all, and the latter not a whit. And I was bebelled upon the sleeves of my coat as well, but the fewer the better, was my thinking on it, for the tiny silver bells were a constant reminder that I was set apart, not quite a servant, but not quite a courtier. Merely a shadow of one or the other, always trailing after, hiding, but a presence none the less. A jester walked a fine line between distraction and destruction. At least I wore my motley, my fool's garb, on the outside. Far too many at court wore them concealed under fine slashed velvets and brocades, and many more under chasuble and mitre. I scanned the great hall, its space as big as a cathedral's insides, or nearly, open wide for the laying out of trestle tables for meals for the many, as they were now. It easily served as a place for ceremonies of state for all of court, or nearly so, to attend and view the king and ministers and foreign officers, or any other gathering that needed bodies crushed together to prove the majesty of the king. Great arched windows above on both sides showered the hall with light, for the ceiling above in its carved wood of arches and pendants was dark, so as to direct the eye to the many intricate tapestries lining the walls. There they depicted hunts and dances and country scenes of royalty observing the farmers at play. Idyllic scenes to remind all and sundry of what it meant to rule and who was being ruled. It was Monday, late afternoon, and there were candles, oh, so many candles, like the stars in the night sky, in chandeliers and raised coronas hanging from the ceiling. It was lavish beyond the most covetous of dreams, for just as I had bells sewn upon my coat, so did courtiers have jewels sewn upon theirs, and they sparkled with celestial light. It was a sight to behold, one a mere lad from Shropshire, as was myself, had never seen before.